Good morning, and we are back. Adam Uglum here in the Community Voice program. Back after talking about Jefferson yesterday to talk more about Jefferson today, and it looks like tomorrow we're going to talk more about Thomas Jefferson. You see, I told you that a little hard to cover Thomas Jefferson and the issues of federalism and natural law here in a half hour, even with only 2 one-minute commercials, thanks to Tanner Health System, who sponsors the program. So anyway, we got to keep moving here. But yesterday we covered kind of the basics of Thomas Jefferson, kind of who he was, got into his personality, certainly his issues and the ideas that he espoused. And tomorrow, I think you can look forward to learning a bit about the founders, freedom, and slavery, and where that all plays in. So we'll talk tomorrow about Jefferson and slavery, but today we're going to get into the principles espoused in the Declaration, natural law, things like that, and how that all plays a big role here. So buckle up. It's education time on the Community Voice program. Adam Uglum hosting here. All right, so from the early 1600s, the New World was settled by the British. Only until a few years before the Declaration of Independence, few colonists had even desired to sever relations with their mother country. However, with the culmination of the French and Indian War, attitudes began to change, both in the colonies and in Great Britain, with regards to that relationship. After fighting broke out in 1775, the aroma of independence permeated the air. Having received authorization from the Constitutional Congress to put into writing what in fact had already begun, a committee was formed to document the reasons for a break from Great Britain. It was not meant to be a document directed at one country, but rather a message to the world. And really, the Declaration became that. It was a message spread around the world, millions of copies spread around the world. Widely popular. And thus a small group of revolutionaries pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, everything they had. Having received with the formation of the Committee of Five, there were five men who were responsible for writing the Declaration of Independence: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. The stage was set for a drama of the highest order. Accepting responsibility for the first draft, Thomas Jefferson documented for all the world the reasons for breaking the umbilical cord that existed between Great Britain and the United States colonies. Jefferson was deeply interested in the philosophical ideas of that period, which was known as the Enlightenment. I mentioned that several times in the program yesterday and in shows prior. He expressed the sentiment, the colonists' belief in natural rights of man. In succinct language, he was very clear that these principles were enunciated in his often quoted second paragraph in the Declaration of Independence, as it reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." Now, this idea, think about it. This is 230 years ago almost. That we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. What a controversial position at that time. That they were inalienable rights. We're living in a time of monarchical power, absolute rule by executive authority, whether it be the monarch or the constitutional republics founded in France or Poland. Very, very new thinking at the time. According to the concept of natural rights, certain rights do not depend on law or institutions, but originate in the substance of humanity itself. This was the big difference in this new line of thinking. This was the Age of Enlightenment. The first of these natural rights is the right to life itself. Life is not something that can be taken away, as it is given to us by God, as Jefferson espoused. The Declaration asserts that basic right to security from forces which inhibit one's own self-preservation. The right to liberty guarantees the proper conditions or circumstances favorable to carrying out the choices made, in that man should be free to pursue his own dreams, make his own life. The pursuit of happiness refers to the help that organized society gives to make a good life possible. This represents a principle for all ages, one where Jefferson tries to tie in old thought with the new. Only these three basic rights are mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. Now, their meanings are often debated, such as the right to equal use of natural resources, which may be necessary in order to secure those rights. As Jefferson commented on the very nature of the Declaration, he was echoing thoughts expressed during an earlier century. During the 17th century, John Locke, who influenced Jefferson more than any other philosopher, wrote this: "The state of nature has a law of nature to govern it, which obliges everyone, and reason, which is that law, teaches all mankind who will but consult it, that being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions." John Locke played a big role in influencing the Founding Fathers. If you've read John Locke's second treatise on government, you know this to be absolutely clear. The parallels between the Federalist Papers, the second treatise on government, and the Declaration of Independence are unmistakable. This is the essence of what we call American republicanism. Ideas that were transferred to the Constitution a decade later, and ideals that became the basis for many later amendments. Radical change is something that is very difficult to achieve. And we'll get into that more tomorrow. And what this boils down to is that the founders, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, Robert Livingston, all of these gentlemen who played critical roles in founding the way the country worked, rhetorically espoused freedom big time. We all know that. They were all about freedom. But yet many of them owned slaves, and that's why we're going to get into that tomorrow and cover that topic and why it's so complicated, because it certainly deserves a half hour to itself. So to come back full circle, the concept of these natural rights, that rights cannot be taken away, they are inherent in men and mankind, and that by association, this is how things are supposed to work. This is the natural part of association among men to form government. They were an integral part of both the Declaration and the Constitution. There have been, and there currently are, many governments that adhere to the ideology that all rights are the result of benign governments, to be dissolved as the situation may warrant. Our Founding Fathers felt that natural rights were the precondition for government, and government was only there to secure and protect the pre-existing rights of individuals. Do the ideals of the Declaration of Independence still ring soundly today? Or, as a famous historian, Carl Becker, was he accurate in saying that what seems to be common sense in one age often seems but nonsense in another, that there's this refracted looking glass taken back on history? We'll come back and talk more about Thomas Jefferson after the break and get into this whole idea of freedom and natural law. The show brought to us by Tanner Health System. Adam Uglum here. I'll be right back. Good morning, and we're back. News Talk 1330 WLBB. Adam Uglum here on the Community Voice program. Today's topic, Thomas Jefferson, continuing a program from earlier. Yesterday, actually. Not just earlier, but just yesterday. Talking about Thomas Jefferson, and it's not a short topic. It's a very broad topic and cannot do the man justice in a couple of half-hour programs. So today we're talking about what influenced Thomas Jefferson. Tomorrow's program we'll be looking into slavery and the founders, Thomas Jefferson, all of that we'll get into tomorrow. So that'll probably be the climactic show, as that's a very controversial issue. How can these guys, these founding fathers, these old white racist guys who owned slaves, how can they be such loud trumpeters of freedom and yet own slaves? We'll get into that tomorrow, and you'll be surprised to learn something new. I gave you this quote yesterday from Thomas Jefferson, and quoting Thomas Jefferson does not get old. One, it makes my job easier because I can occupy airtime with Thomas Jefferson. But anyway, so here we are. And a very controversial one. This isn't one you hear too often. to take from one because it is thought that his own industry and that of his fathers has acquired too much in order to spare to others who or whose fathers have not exercised equal industry and skill is to violate arbitrarily the first principle of association, the guarantee to everyone of a free exercise of his industry and the fruits acquired by it. So for a brief moment, let's consider again these gentlemen who espoused freedom so broadly, yet they're criticized for owning slaves, and very few did, actually. We'll cover that tomorrow, but we need to remember that Kim Jong-il was not exactly the nicest person. Bill Clinton, FDR, Kennedy, Newt Gingrich, they all couldn't keep it in their collective pants. Mao, Guevara, Hitler, Stalin, Mussolini, they all killed millions for the sake of their political ideologies. Many people prescribe to philosophies held by maniacs and other terrible people. And as I often quote James Madison, or at least rhetoricize James Madison, men are no angels, nor ever will there be angels found to govern men. Taking a fallible facet of a fallible creature is rhetorically worthless until you can find the perfect creature whom will serve as an example for all of the rest. It comes from this very basic and natural understanding, both from Hobbes and from John Locke, that man is not perfect. Therefore, neither will his private institutions be perfect, neither will his public institutions be perfect. So take a step back there for a moment. I mean, that same line of thinking, that the founders were hypocrites because they had slaves, they can't espouse freedom and own slaves at the same time. It doesn't make any sense. Well, if Pizza Hut sells pizza to crackheads and adulterers on a daily basis, does that make Pizza Hut a bad company? It's basically the same argument. The issue of slavery was very complicated, and that's why I've dedicated a whole half hour to it tomorrow. So look forward to that program. Now, Thomas Jefferson, obviously very, very, very influenced by John Locke. I mean, you would think you were reading Thomas Jefferson when you're reading John Locke, but you're reading John Locke. Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you think you're reading John Locke when you read Thomas Jefferson. Now, Jefferson was a bit more of a deist than Locke. He's not nearly as religious as John Locke. So there's one clear distinction that I could tell in reading the second treatise on government was that big difference between the two. It was the Age of Enlightenment. It was maybe not quite 100 years after John Locke, but John Locke clearly played a big influence. But the idea of the social contract is really one of the foundations of the American political system. It's the belief that the state only exists to serve the will of the people, and they are the source of all political power enjoyed by the state, and they can choose to give or withhold this power. Then we get into some other interesting waters as well. Is the will of the people necessarily the right thing to do? Is it okay for 70% to tell the 30 what's okay and what's not? The origin of the term social contract can be found all the way back into the writings of Plato, and especially in Hobbes. And Hobbes is a very interesting guy. I read a good bit of Leviathan earlier this semester. And he's very interesting, especially comparing him to Locke and his Leviathan. Hobbes paints a much darker picture of humanity. And his response to the English Civil War is also very intriguing. In the book, Leviathan, he wrote that in the earliest days there was no government. Instead, those who were the strongest could simply take control and use their power at any time over others. Hobbes's theory was that people mutually agreed to create a state, only giving it enough power to provide protection of their well-being. However, in Hobbes' theory, once the power was given to the state, the people then relinquished any rights to that power. In effect, that would be the price of the protection they sought. And that was back in the 1500s when Thomas Hobbes was writing. Jean-Jacques Rousseau and John Locke took the social contract theory a bit further and were a bit more colorful and optimistic. Rousseau wrote The Social Contract, or Principles of Political Thought, either one, in both he explains that the government is based on the idea of popular sovereignty, that government does not exist without the will of the people. The will of the people as a whole gives power and direction to the state. John Locke also based his political writings on the idea of the social contract. He stressed the role of the individual. He also believed that revolution was not just a right, but an obligation if the state abused their given power. And it's very clear that these ideas all had a big impact on Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and other founders. Again, if you have a little time to do some reading, the second treatise on government is very short. It's very clear that John Locke was a big influence on Thomas Jefferson, and it's really not that bad to read, to be perfectly honest. I guess I'm getting kind of used to it, so take that with a grain of salt since I read them all the time. John Locke was a very interesting fellow. He was a British philosopher who rejected the idea that kings had a divine right to rule. Instead, Locke argued that people are the source of power, not kings. So, and this even passed down through Thomas Jefferson, this idea of divine right. He argued that people are born with certain natural or inalienable rights, and these include the right to life, liberty, and property. Government did not give people these rights. People are born with them, and as such, no government can take them away. We'll take a quick break, and I apologize, couldn't get to your phone call. I saw somebody was calling. We'll come back from the break, and if you have a question or a comment, we'll take that when we come back. We're back. Good morning. News Talk 1330 WLBB. It's 8:50 on the world clock. The telephone number is 678-601-8255. I'll take a few phone calls if you have any questions or comments in the last 10 minutes or so of the program, if we can squeeze them in. So get them in now if you're curious. Again, the number 678-601-TALK is the telephone number. So coming back from the break, again, we're talking. If you're just tuning in, you've missed out. We're looking at an educational series here the last day or so. Well, it is the last day or so. Today, talking about who influenced Thomas Jefferson, and it's John Locke is really the big picture here. Yesterday, we talked about Thomas Jefferson, who he is, what he did, and how interesting of a fellow he is. I even gave you a little bio of what he did at different ages in his life. He was studying Greek, Spanish, spent a lot of time studying Western democracy in Athens and Greece. And the founders were all very big. It was the Age of Enlightenment, so you have to take a look back at what the time period was like. The Age of Enlightenment was a very interesting time indeed. Organized religion was really on the downturn during this time period, and mostly from discontent with the way things were happening in Europe. We had state-ran religious organizations, the Church of England, financed by tax dollars, to influence the people the way it wanted to. People were very discontent with organized religion for those very reasons, because organized religion typically ran the state up until the 1700s. And then this idea of popular sovereignty really came around. And again, the Declaration of Independence really encapsulates the entire argument for all people against government that is unjust. And a government founded on a religious principle is unjust. If it's going to enforce one religious sect, that is not right. And that was really espoused by the founders. Well, that could be a whole other show. We can talk about whether or not the founders were Christians or not. Might get myself in trouble. I don't know. Anyway, so it's really interesting to see the parallels between John Locke and Thomas Jefferson. I mean, the guys were 100 years apart when it came to their lives. But Jefferson clearly echoes Locke in the Declaration. And even his famous quotes about how we're supposed to have revolutions and rebellions every 20 years. He wrote to Madison in a letter, I forget the year. I think it was 92, or maybe it was a little before the Declaration. I'm not quite, maybe it was just after the Declaration. I can't remember. But James Madison and Thomas Jefferson were good friends, and they disagreed on a certain number of things, but they wrote hundreds of letters back and forth, and you can read them as books. Very interesting. If you really want to know what this country is supposed to be like, I mean, to me, it amazes me the Supreme Court judges aren't sitting there with a copy of the Federalist Papers and the letters between James Madison and Thomas Jefferson in front of each other. That's what's funny is that's how the Supreme Court used to work. They didn't look at law precedent. They actually went back to the Federalist Papers when they were deciding on court cases. Oh, to live back then. Things are better now, trust me. But certainly an interesting distinction. Locke also argued that if government failed to protect our natural rights, and this is where Jefferson comes in echoing Locke, that people had the rights to replace the government because the government was for the people and by the people because its power was derived in its citizens. And we'll go to the phones. We have a caller on line 2. Good morning. You are on the Community Voice. Hello.
Hey, Adam.
Hey there. How are you?
Hey, this is Robert Bell.
Hey, Robert. What's going on, man? What can I do for you?
I have a question. It's on topic with Thomas Jefferson. As you know, Ron Paul would like to abolish the Federal Reserve and reinstitute the gold standard. And Thomas Jefferson is quoted saying, "Paper is poverty. It is only the ghost of money and not money itself." Do you think reinstituting the gold standard is such a far-fetched idea in this day and age?
I don't think it is so much far-fetched as it is difficult because getting rid of the Fed in a day would destroy the world's economy. I am all for ending the Fed personally, but I can understand the sentiment that it's going to take a period of decades to phase out the Fed in order to soften its impact on the world economy. Just because the Fed has its fingers in so many things. I mean, it spends trillions and trillions and loans trillions and trillions all the time. It's a weird super bank that is just crazy when it comes to the global economy. So ending the Federal Reserve is a good thing. We can't jerk the carpet out from under the world economy, though, because the Fed plays such a big role in it. And the gold standard, I don't think, is far-fetched, especially because it's something that's certainly doable. Because the price of gold is just going to have to stay where it is, I guess. We'll have to price our dollars based on that. But I think it's doable. We just have to get that conversation going, and Ron Paul's certainly done that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate the phone call.
All right.
And that's another interesting point about Jefferson. And you could probably do a whole nother show, or I could do a whole nother show about Jefferson and his hatred for banks. He and Hamilton and Madison, man, did those guys have some arguments about banks. Jefferson vastly opposed to banks on just about every level. But and Jefferson, I think, owed quite a lot of money to banks, so he had pretty good reasons for not liking banks. But, man, that was really one of the first big constitutional arguments, too. Looking back into the early 1800s, that was one of the big things, was whether or not it was constitutional to have a bank. I mean, the country was broke right after it was founded. We'd financed the Revolutionary War from borrowing money largely from France, borrowing money from the public in the form of bonds. Paying back the debt was really a big issue. I should probably cut the phone off. That would help. Okay, now we don't sound funny. Okay, so anyway, the bank was a big issue. Especially early on in the 1800s, and lots of debate back and forth with the first charter of the National Bank, the second charter, and even Jackson. Andrew Jackson was a big opponent of banks, and he vetoed a bank bill. We could cover that in another program. Banking would be, I think, an interesting show. We'll have to hit on that on another day. But I hope you've learned today enough about Jefferson and at least his influences. And if you really do have the time, and I hate to give you homework, but especially if my shows are going to be a little more concentrated on the educational side we don't get from our public school system, it's time to learn about these things. Every student in high school should be reading John Locke's Second Treatise on Government. I mean, the book is an eighth of an inch thick, maybe. It's a very thin book. It's really an excerpt of essays, I guess, on government. And that will really tell you the founding of the country, even though it was written by an Englishman 100 years before the Declaration of Independence. I mean, you're not really sure whether you're reading Jefferson or Locke. You can tell, because Jefferson, again, is quite opposed to organized religion, and Locke not so much. But to be very clear here, in that the Founding Fathers, Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, if one claims that they were deists on the basis of God went away, and the radical French Enlightenment of Voltaire and the French encyclopedists, the answer is clearly no. They all believed that God was both present and active, and they also clearly drew their moral beliefs from Christianity. Now, were they disenfranchised a bit about religion? Absolutely. Most all of them clearly rejected the doctrines of the Trinity, original sin, predestination. They all rejected that completely. In other words, it was often a complete rejection of Calvinism. For the most part, the Founding Fathers were rational theists, or Unitarians, you might call them. They were much more clockwork type believers. They believed that God certainly played a role, and man was to choose his own destiny, not that there was a set destiny for man. So a big distinction when you look at the founding of the country is to make that very clear. They did all believe in God. Now, did they go to church every Sunday? I don't think so. Did they like everything that was said in the Bible? Probably not. I don't think anybody likes everything that was said in the Bible. But we can unequivocally say that the primary influence of the Declaration, the founding of the country, the U.S. Constitution, were clearly folks like John Locke, Montesquieu, the Bible, Greek philosophy, Thomas Hobbes, and even the Freemasons played a very large role in the founding of the country. Take a look at the greenbacks in your wallet sometime and tell me the Freemasons weren't involved in the formation of the ideals of government. And I have to leave you with this. It's a big mistake to view democracy as simply unbridled individualism that results in chaos and destroys the system, leading often to totalitarianism. We are, on the other hand, expected to live in peace in a general system and under the rule of law, and this is why so many Americans today, I believe, are angry with government as the elite attempts to impose European-style democracy on Americans, where the people rule absolutely. And we can't do that. There's another good topic for a show. We can talk about Lincoln and Dred Scott and how the society cannot rule simply. Democracy is a good thing, but people cannot rule simply. American democracy focuses on the individual. European democracy focuses on the mob operating through the state. So look forward to tomorrow's program. We'll get into the founders and slavery on tomorrow's program and clear up a few things there and give you some facts and figures about it all, too. Right here on the Community Voice tomorrow at 8:30. I'll catch you guys early on tomorrow at 6 a.m. for the morning news program, 6 to 8:30, Monday through Friday, right here on News Talk 1330 WLBB. I forgot to mention, don't forget, check out my website. I'll have the programs available on there as well. The website, libertariat.wordpress.com. I'll have those as a YouTube file posted on my page. You can listen to them later as well if you missed earlier segments of the program. Hope you have a wonderful hump day. It's a wet and rainy one.
News Talk 1330 WLBB.